Hello and welcome back to EPT11 in Barcelona. As you all know, I found a lot of fun Ivey stories at the World Series of Poker, but I'm going to continue this trend, and I found Mr. Joe Stapleton, who has a long history with Mr. Phil Ivey, I'm assuming, but he was kind enough also to share a story with me. So Joe, what's the story that you have with Ivey?
Well, I kind of do have a history with Ivey, and the sort of the backstory to this is that I've hung out with Ivey and I've done different things with Ivey many times over the years, and he just never quite seems to remember me. And so that sort of has something to do with the end of this story. This particular story takes place at the EPT Grand Final a couple of years ago, and the night before the start of the 100,000 euro super high roller event, I went out with Daniel Negreanu, and he took me to where Ivey had a table at a club, and it did take a little convincing. He's like, look, I want to bring this guy, Joe Stapleton, and Ivey's like, well, who is that? Not offended by this, even though we've hung out before, Phil, and I've interviewed you so many times. And Daniel's like, look, he's not a girl, so sorry, but he's a really funny guy. And Ivey's like, all right, bring the dude. So we hang out with Ivey. We go to this club, which by the way is closed. It's just completely closed except for Phil's table. It's Phil's table, and there's one random dude who's just kind of sitting in the corner, like, he wants to like come over and talk to us and hang, but he's being like a weird creeper dude. First thing that happens is there's bottles of rosé, champagne, Dom Perignon rosé that are being popped. And when I show up to someone else's table, I don't pour myself a drink. I sort of wait around till I'm offered a drink. Eventually, I get offered one, and when I finally start drinking, Phil stops me, and I'm like, oh man, this is really embarrassing. And he's like, no, I want you to do shots of tequila. So we had bottles of Patron were just delivered, and so I do a shot of tequila and another shot of tequila, and I go to do, and he like wants me to do a third one, and luckily the bottle runs out, and I'm like, oh thank God, I don't have to do any more shots of tequila. And he's like, wait a second. Another bottle of tequila comes over, so me and Daniel and Phil and a couple other people can I cuss?
Of course.
We get shit-faced. We get absolutely shit-faced. And so finally the club closes. The weird creeper guy, who at one point security removes from us because he comes over and he's being weird, comes up to us a few times on the street. I'm like, look, dude, can you please just leave us alone? You're being a little weird. I end up shoving the guy eventually, and I felt terrible about that. I felt really bad, but he's being weird and aggressive. And then so once I shove him, I'm like this because I'm expecting him to get off the ground and try to fight me, and he just gets up and sort of like dusts himself off and walks away, which made me feel even worse. I don't know, I probably shouldn't have said that. This is one of the biggest regrets of my life, was shoving this guy, but anyway, he left. So we're walking down the street, and Daniel at this point starts telling Phil that he's like, you would be nothing without me, like I helped you out when you were broke, blah, 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 and he's like going off on all this stuff from like way back in the day, and Phil's just laughing, smiling, whatever, and then all of a sudden, please forgive me for acting this out, because it's about the same height difference between Phil and Daniel as me and you. Daniel just goes like this all of a sudden and just slaps Phil across the face. And I'm like, oh shit. It's on. It's on right now. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to break up a fight right now between Daniel Negreanu and Phil Ivey. And Phil looks at me and goes, you saw that, right? And I was like, yeah. I was like, what are you gonna do? He's like, don't worry about it, but just remind me tomorrow that I owe Daniel a slap. I'm like, okay, thank God nothing happened. So we're walking down the street a little bit further. All of a sudden, again, Daniel's getting real fired up, slaps Phil across the face again, even harder this time. And I'm like, okay, that's it. Like, Phil Ivey just got slapped across the face twice by Daniel. It is on right now. Like, it's on. It's pandemonium. It's World War III. It's pandemonium 2011. Whatever it is, it's going. Didn't go down. And Phil looks at me and goes, 2 slaps. Remember, 2 slaps now. So we get.
I can still be Phil, right? When this.
Oh yeah, no, when you get the payback, yeah. So we get back to the hotel, and Daniel at this point is so wasted that he goes, guys, I'm sorry, I just gotta lay down for a second, and lays down on the ground in the lobby of the Monte Carlo Bay Hotel. At this point, immediately, when you lay down in a place like this, security comes over immediately, and they start poking around at Daniel, and Phil just goes like this, do not touch this man. And they're like, we're sorry, but we have to. He goes, do not touch this man. I spent $500,000 here last year. You do not touch this man. And they were like, okay, no problem. Sounds good. So we eventually, the security guards come to some sort of arrangement. We put Daniel in a wheelchair. I say to Phil, look, Phil, I got this. Don't worry. And he's like, okay, bro, sounds good. We do a little dap. He leaves. I take Daniel back to his room. Different story what happens there. The next day, I see Phil in the super high roller, and I'm like, is Phil finally going to remember me this time? Like, we've hung out so many times. Is he going to remember me? And he looks at me and goes, yo, you remember how Daniel 2 slaps, right? And I was like, yes, I do remember this. And yes, you remember me. And I was like, oh, cool, man. Yeah, it was awesome last night. And he goes, yeah, man, good hanging out with you, Jason. So, yeah.
Jason Stapleton, great Ivey story, but did you see him give the slaps back?
He didn't give the slaps back. I don't know what they worked out on their own. Maybe there was some sort of payment, some sort of fine system. I really don't know how it went down. Also, Daniel showed up at the last possible minute, and I believe they did some sort of major swap too, like when they were wasted. And I was like, you also remember like that you've got like half of Daniel in this or something. I don't remember exactly what it was. And he was like, yeah, I remember. It's fine. And I think Daniel went on to make the final table in that event. It wasn't even a min cash either. So all's well that ends well. And maybe Daniel got slapped later. And maybe I would take it, honestly, if Phil remembers me as Jason. As long as he addresses me by a name that starts with J, I think that's a win.
I think so too. I mean, I've interviewed him and he has no idea who I am. Eventually, if I keep doing these Ivey stories, I'm sure he will. Joe Stapleton, I should say, thank you very much for your Ivey story. Stay tuned to Poker.com because we'll bring you plenty more of these.